Bruchim Aboyim, again, welcome to our home. Thank you for attending. This week on My Thoughts, we will continue with our in-depth examination of Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, with the 15th Mishnah in this chapter. This Mishnah introduces us to Shammai. He served alongside Hillel as the leaders of the generation. In this Mishnah, Shammai states, Nasei Torascha Keva, that you should make your Torah fixed, say little and do much, and receive every person with a pleasant countenance. Now, among the Mishnayot of Pirkei Avot, few are as concise and yet encompassing as Mishnah 15. In three short, essential statements, Shammai lays out a complete spiritual architecture of how a Jew relates to Torah, how they translate values into action, and how they interact with other human beings. Excuse me. These are not three separate teachings. They are three expressions of one integrated demand, emet, truth, which lives on consistently. Shammai is often remembered as the strict counterpart to Hillel's more lenient approach. The Talmud frequently contrasts their approaches, more often than not, to Shammai's disadvantage. Yet Pirkei Avot preserves Shammai's ethical voice not as rigid or cold, but rather as disciplined, grounded, and deeply humane. His words reflect a man who believes that holiness must be dependable, substantive, and visible for all to see in our daily lives. Now, this Mishnah speaks powerfully to generations overwhelmed by words, intentions, and ideals that are rarely anchored in substantive practice. Shammai calls instead for quiet strength, fixed commitment, restrained speech, generous action, and a face that radiates dignity and a warm smile that is displayed for all to see. The Mishnah begins with the words, Torascha Keva, make your Torah fixed. Rabbeinu Yonah explains that the word keva, fixed, means that Torah must occupy a permanent place in one's daily schedule and consciousness, not occasional or optional. Torah is not what one does when there is time. Torah is what defines what time is meant to be used for. The Jew structures his life around Torah, not Torah around his life. Now, the word keva alludes to routine. Routine demands discipline. Without both, success in Torah and in life become difficult, if not impossible. Even a bad routine has merit, since you have what to tweak. Without routine, you're like a ship sailing without a captain. The Rambam codifies this principle by ruling that every Jew, poor or wealthy, young or old, must establish fixed time for Torah study. Without regularity, even great inspiration evaporates. Consistency, not intensity, is what forms a true Torah personality. The Maharal of Prague deepens the idea. He says that Keva is not merely a scheduling rule, but rather a philosophical stance. Torah must be the foundation of one's identity. A person who treats Torah as secondary, will eventually absorb values from elsewhere, such as status, productivity, or social approval. When Torah is fixed, it becomes the lens through which all of one's life is viewed and interpreted. Work, family, and community do not compete with Torah. Actually, they serve and are elevated by it. He explains that Torah is the tzura, the form of the Jewish soul. Without Torah at the center, the soul loses its definition. Torah does not merely dictate behavior, it gives existence its structure. The Zohar teaches us that the world stands on Torah. The Arizal explains that these words are meant that regular Torah study creates stable spiritual vessels. Inconsistent Torah study only draws down fleeting illumination. However, Keva draws down or panimi, which means an internalized divine light that reshapes the soul. So when one fixes established times for Torah, what it does is it stabilizes not only the individual, but in addition the spiritual fabric of the world. The Hasidic masters stress that keva does not require large quantities of learning, but it does require unwavering commitment. Quality versus quantity. The word keva, spelled kuf beis ayin, is an acronym for Kabbalot Ol, accepting the yoke of heaven. The Holy Baal Shem Tov taught us that a short daily learning session, done faithfully, illuminates the heavens more than the sporadic brilliance. The Kotzker Rebbe warned against religious volatility. True service of God is steady, not dramatic. Shammai's words in Torah is consistency, much like the sun that rises and sets every day. I always advise my students to keep a Hebrew book on their nightstand. I tell them that every night, before they go to sleep, they should read 3 verses. They generally ask me, just 3 verses? I answer yes. I tell them that a battleship is held securely to the dock with a relatively small rope. So too, just a few sentences of Torah study daily can keep a Jewish soul from drifting aimlessly and losing its connection to its godly source. The Mishnah continues with the words, Amor ma'at v'aseh harba, say a little and do much. The Bartanuver explains that this teaching warns against promising more than one can deliver. Ethical life depends on trust, and trust depends on alignment between speech and action. Better to understate and overperform than to inspire and then disappoint. Avram Avinu, Abraham, our father, exemplified this trait. In the portion of Vayera in the book of Bereshit, he offered the 3 angels who posed as wayfarers only a morsel of bread. But then, he presented them with a banquet. His greatness was a testimony to his actions, not in his rhetoric. He set the standard for ethical integrity through his speech and generosity. Judaism treats speech as sacred. The world itself was actually created by God Almighty through the power of speech. As it states in the opening chapter in Bereshit, Vayomer Elokim, Vayihi chen, and God said, and it was so. When speech is detached from action, well, then it can become a form of falsehood. This is true even when one's intentions are sincere. Mankind is referred to in Hasidic teachings as a medaber, one who speaks. Midrashic literature is sharply critical of those whose mouths overflow with ideals, while their hands remain idle. Such speech is not neutral, it corrodes sincerity. The Medrash teaches us that there are people who build towers with their mouths, but leave the foundations empty. The Kotzker Rebbe asked, where is God? He then answered, wherever you let him in. Endless talk about holiness can become a substitute for holiness itself. Shammai refuses to allow speech to replace service. That is the method of our evil inclination, our Yetzer Hara, who uses it to fool us. He encourages us to think about it and talk about being more righteous. However, more often than not, that is where it ends, with little to no connection to action. Yet somehow we feel self-righteous since we have God in our heart. The problem is that we acknowledge that God does exist, but only in our words, not in our actions. Hasidic thought insists that action carves pathways in the soul that allow understanding to follow. The words that the children of Israel proclaimed in Mount Sinai when they received the Torah was, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, and then we will listen. Saying that we will do even before we understand is the Jewish method of spiritual development. As it states in the Talmud in the Tractate of Sota, Rebbe Huda states, B'tok shelo lishma, ba lishma. That which is not initially performed with absolute sincerity will eventually come to be performed with complete sincerity, meaning that a person should always engage in Torah and perform its commandments even if not done for their own sake, since doing so will eventually lead one to genuine, selfless commitment to God Almighty and His Torah. The Holy Baal Shem Tov taught that even a simple mitzvah done with complete sincerity can ignite worlds. Shammai's demand is not simplicity, but authenticity. His strictness is applied to truth, not to people. Integrity and kindness are not opposites. They reinforce each other. Shammai's words are radical. Judaism is not proven by slogans, but rather by following through with positive action. The Mishnah concludes with the words, Tava Makabel es kol ha'adam b'sefer panim yafot. Receive every person with a pleasant countenance. The Meiri emphasizes that this directive applies to every person, Jew and non-Jew alike. In the Talmud in the Tractate Yevamot, Tosfos writes that when the Torah uses the Hebrew word Adam, man, it alludes to only a Jew. However, when the letter He is added, Ha-Adam, then it alludes to both Jew and non-Jew alike. Shammai is telling us that one should greet all men, to include Gentiles, with a pleasant countenance. Now, a pleasant countenance is not superficial, politeness, but a recognition of a divine image that resides within each and every person, as it states in the first chapter of the Torah. There it says that God Almighty created all mankind, B'Tzalmo, in His own image. The Talmud in the Tractate of Bava Metzia teaches that humiliating another person is tantamount to murder. Now, murder in the Torah is referred to with the words shvichat damim, the spilling of blood. When you embarrass another person, many times it causes blood to rush to their face. They become flushed. Shortly afterwards, the blood drains from their face and they become ashen. You have, in essence, spilled blood. Conversely, one who brightens another person's face restores life. In Kabbalah, panim, the word face, represents one's inner essence. The Zohar teaches us that joy on one's face opens channels of blessings. It also teaches us that even one who cannot help another person materially can still help them emotionally. After all, a smile doesn't cost a penny, but what it can accomplish is priceless. The Arizal explains that greeting another person warmly awakens chesed, kindness, from above. There is a saying, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. The joy that is expressed on a person's face sweetens judgments in the spiritual realms. A smile is not trivial, it is metaphysical. There is a Hasidic belief that when you send up, what you send up to heaven is exactly what you will receive here on earth. There is a Hasidic aphorism, trach gut vet sein gut, meaning positive thoughts create positive results. This saying is attributed to the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Lubavitcher movement. The story is told that he passed away on a Saturday night shortly after the end of the Shabbat. In the room with him at the time was his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek. His father had passed away at a very young age, and it was the Alter Rebbe who brought him up. The Tzemach Tzedek, who would later become the third Rebbe of Lubavitch, was praying Ma'ariv, the evening prayer, in his grandfather's room. He knew that his beloved grandfather had very little time left to live. As you can imagine, his prayer was filled with tears and sorrow. When he finished praying, his grandfather said to him sternly, Nish gerecht. It was not proper. He rebuked his grandson for the way that he had recited his evening prayer. He said to him, what you send up to heaven is exactly what heaven returns back to you. If you send up joy, well, then you receive joy. But if you send up sorrow, then it will be sorrow that you will receive. That is when he told them the famous words of positive thoughts create positive results. More than we realize, we are the masters of our own destiny. You know, the Mishnah could have ended with the words ponim yofos, a pleasant countenance. So what does the extra word besever add? The word is connected to the Hebrew word svara, thought. The Mishnah is telling us that we should project a positive demeanor towards another person when we are in the process of extending a kindness to them. This is especially true at times when internally we may be troubled. Rabbeinu Bachai states in Chovos HaLevavos, the duties of the heart, that a person's face is considered a reshut harabim, a public domain. When an Orthodox Jew projects misery rather than joy on his face, he is accusing God, his Father in heaven, of child abuse. As it states in Tehillim, Psalm 100, it is our obligation to ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, to serve God with joy. Bottom line, Shammai offers no drama, only truth. This Mishnah teaches that holiness is not built through grand gestures, but through consistency, integrity, and kindness. A life anchored in Torah observance, proven through action and illuminated by warmth, becomes a living Kiddush Hashem, a sanctification of God Almighty's name. To live Shammai's Mishnah today means carving out sacred time amid distractions, choosing action over performance, and seeing the divine image even in difficult times and people. This may not be easy, but one can be certain that it is transformative. Torah must be steady and consistent, not occasional or convenient. Actions speak louder than words. Sometimes a single sincere smile can teach more than 1,000 words. Hope you found this lecture interesting and informative. May God Almighty bless you with the strength and wisdom to follow the advice of the sages. Next week, God willing, we will continue with the 16th Mishnah in this chapter. And let us all continue to pray for a swift and complete victorious end to the war in the Middle East with the total annihilation of Iran and all of her proxies. Let us celebrate the return of all the hostages. I want to add something to that. The last of the hostages was returned this week. His name was Ron, Reish Nun. The IDF, went through 249 bodies till they found his. His was the 215th body that they examined. The numerical value of the name Ron, Reish Nun, is 250. Nothing in this world is an accident. So let us celebrate the return of all the hostages. May God Almighty cure the sick and injured, comfort all the mourners, and return home all the brave IDF soldiers, led by Mashiach Tzidkeinu, quickly, and let it be in our time. Again, let me thank you for attending, for listening, and hopefully it's made an impression on you and has an effect on your life to help you, again, get closer to God Almighty, our Father in heaven. If you will, please push the like button. If you have not subscribed, please do. And make it a point, please, talk to your friends, share with your friends. Everyone's looking today for the elusive butterfly of peace. It begins with you and I. God bless you all. Have a great Shabbat.